So what's sense restraint?
Sense restraint.
You've been saying that recently that it's important for a layperson, even if they're not become a monk, they really want to progress in Dhamma, sense restraint isn't optional. But I wonder if everyone knows what you're referring to when you say sense restraint.
Well, the most obviously it's the precepts. So 5 precepts, 8 precepts. But it needs to be taken on as I think I discussed that in a previous talk. You take it on as a value, precepts, but then you can obviously keep refining their value. So that's where the where the sense restraint, you can really benefit from it, because you can precepts in itself will not make you practice the Dhamma. So you can have absolutely unbroken precepts, but also never really make the effort to think about motivation behind your actions, whether it's rooted in desire or greed or aversion, but you just adhere to precepts. So it's still better than not keeping them at all, but in itself it won't result in any understanding. Because if it were so, then the Buddha would have said, all you need to do is be virtuous and you'll become an arahant. So Dhamma, there is no Dhamma without Sila, there is no Dhamma without the precepts, but Dhamma is not the precepts. So sense restraint starts with the precepts, but then you can start to sort of train and practice understanding of it. So it's not just you don't do certain things that are rooted in desire, you also want to make the effort while you're not doing those things rooted in desire. So while you're restrained, you want to make the effort to understand why is that good? Why is sense restraint wholesome? Why is non-sense restraint unwholesome? And so that's what I mean, like the precepts are obvious things you should not go below, but then if you start following the principle of anything that's rooted in desire, anything that's rooted in aversion, anything that's rooted in distraction and delusion is unwholesome, then even some things seemingly wholesome externally are actually unwholesome, because they are determined as unwholesome, not based on the external perception of it, but based on whether they are rooted in greed, aversion and delusion internally.
So it's all about your motivation.
It's about, it's about you developing the sight of the motivation behind your actions, which is always there.
And sort of discriminating, and like, because I think, some people, you're likely to take sense restraint too far.
Yeah, of course, like that's the natural response.
Yeah. Like
completely unrestrained,
downcast, don't look at anything.
Then say no to everything.
Yeah.
No, that's what I mean. The starting point is not saying no to everything. The starting point is saying no to obviously unwholesome things that are against 5 precepts, or if you're taking on the 8 precepts, against 8 precepts. If it's not against those things, it's fine. But that doesn't mean you should be unclear in regard to either. You need to have clarity, why is this fine and why this isn't fine. So yes, you've taken it on as an external value of virtue must be developed. I don't know why, but I have to start developing it. That's a necessary first step. But then you also want to understand why it is necessary and to what extent it's necessary.
So you might say sense restraint is taking that kind of sort of mechanical, just sort of thoughtlessly avoiding certain actions, is taking it into the realm of understanding.
Exactly, yeah. Because as you said, it's quite normal to just, once you think, okay, so virtue is necessary, virtue is valuable, sense restraint is valuable, then you start restraining against everything, saying no to everything.
Yeah.
I want to go for a walk, no. I want to sit down, no. I want to stand up, no.
Yeah.
And then you just wind yourself up completely.
Yeah, I remember people...
There's no wisdom there either. Not more than if you just say yes to everything. That's what Buddha said, self-mortification and sensuality are basically 2 ends of the same plane.
I remember hearing a story about a monk who was staying in a cave, and some laypeople came and pointed out the drawings on the cave walls. Amazing. And the monk said, what drawings?
He never looked up.
Never looked up because he was so restrained. He'd kept his eyes downcast all the time.
All the time.
And that was praiseworthy.
Oh wow. So all you need to do to free yourself from suffering is look at the ground.
Just keep looking at the ground.
So does that imply if you look elsewhere, that's where the suffering is rooted?
It does imply that, doesn't it?
Yeah. And that's a problem with that view. But
so basically, it's the sense restraint really is about learning to find out where the problem is.
Yeah. So the value of precepts now made even more personal, internalized, so to speak. So now you really recognize the value of value of restraint, as opposed to non-value of lack of restraint. You start to recognize why, when you avoid to look, taste, smell, touch, and so on, things out of desire, why is that better? It won't be clear overnight. It's not like a one, oh yes, that's why. It's something that needs to be sort of trained in, to sort of keep reapplying that value until it becomes clear in itself, because it is better. But until you know for yourself why, you will be then adhering to your Sila, your virtue, your sense restraint, it will be a fetter to you. It will be something you do on account of things you don't do, but either way there is no understanding in regard to it. So that's why we often talk about motivation behind the actions. That's what determines. Like that's always like, even the precepts, breaking the precepts is bad, not because it's bad in itself, but it's bad because it's impossible to break the precepts without the motivation being rooted in greed, aversion, delusion. So there's certain things that if done, they can only be done either by greed, aversion or delusion.
5 precepts, not the 8.
5 precepts, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why that's always bad. But, and that's why even if somebody who doesn't want to practice Dhamma should live by the 5 precepts. Because those things are on the level of animal behavior, as the Buddha described. But now we are talking about somebody who wants to practice Dhamma, not just be a virtuous a person and living a life without any pursuit of the Dhamma values. So you want to practice the Dhamma, means you need to be more restrained than just 5 precepts. But that restraint now will not be written, out there on the sky. They will always tell you that's always wrong and that's always good. It will be determined by why you want to do it
and how you're feeling.
Yeah. So the same thing. We gave that example before. Like, oh, you want to go, I don't know, to a library to get some books to read, suttas, and externally it's a good thing. Because reading suttas is always good. But internally, you might be doing it for completely wrong reasons, as in false pretenses, as in unwholesome reasons. Because you want to go and socialize, you want to go and, I don't know, meet other people there and sort of be distracted from your solitude, and so on. And so externally, the same thing is there, but if you do it for the purpose of reading the suttas, it's good. If you do it for the purpose of just wanting company, even if you're still reading the suttas, it's not good. So that's what you want to develop, the ability to discern that. Regardless of, oh, this is always good, this is always bad. Yes, but why am I doing it? What is my reason for wanting to do this? What is my reason for not wanting to do this? Because that motivation behind your actions, behind the possible actions, is always there while those actions or possibilities of those actions are there. So that's how you get to discern the intentions behind the context, the mind in itself. Regardless of your behavior, so to speak. But by that behavior must have been purified to some extent beforehand. Because you're not going to see motivation behind your actions if you don't even keep the 5 precepts, if you can't keep the 5 precepts. Means you absolutely no criteria for any discernment.
So you sort of level the ground with you keeping the precepts, habitually avoiding certain actions.
Yeah, you have to start like that, but then you want to start looking behind that. Yeah. So okay, I'm avoiding this because the precept said this should be avoided. Okay. So now if the precept says that this, well, if the precept doesn't state whether something else should be avoided or not, do I avoid it or not? How do you know that?
Yeah. How could I know that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you know that by knowing whether it's rooted in a greed, aversion, delusion.
Yeah.
But if you never look for where things are rooted, where your own motivation is rooted, you're never going to see that.
Yeah.
So then you're going to need and require others to tell you whether you can do it. And go and ask Ajahn to tell you, and just these random things, and just get the answer. But even then, you won't think for yourself in that manner.
You'll never see what craving is.
No. So that's what sense restraint is. You don't restrain your senses in regard to everything. You restrain your senses in regard to things that you know are rooted in desire, aversion and distraction. That's all. So on a practical basis, say you live by the 5 precepts, you keep the 8 precepts, and then during the day, you have to, if you want to practice that correct form of sense restraint, you have to keep a corner of your eye on your own mind. Because you're about to do something, and you want to see before you do it whether that's rooted in desire or non-desire. Whether it's rooted in ill will, irritation, or non-ill will and non-irritation. Whether it's rooted in desire for distraction, excitement, or non-distraction and non-excitement. And it's not in the things. Excitement, non-excitement, desire, non-desire, it's not in the things. It's in your own reasons behind doing them and committing to those things. So then you restrain when it's rooted in desire, greed, aversion, delusion. If it's not, you don't need to restrain. And that's how you get to then develop that space for practice, so to speak. Because if you're just saying no to everything all the time, it's just getting tighter and tighter and tighter. Everything. So I will not move, I will not say. And then as the Buddha himself done before he was enlightened, I'll stop breathing. Yeah. And then, that's completely ignorant of me to try and do. But yeah, it would that would be the kind of the extreme combination of that same attitude. Of no. First you were saying yes to everything, now you're saying no to everything. Like the deer herd simile we often mention in the suttas. First one eats the bait carelessly, gets hooked. Second one sees that, then shuns all the food altogether. Runs on the mountain, starves, comes back, eats carelessly, gets hooked again. So the only way to then not be hooked by Mara is to not shun the bait, but not eat it carelessly either. And how you do that? By discerning whether things you want to see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think about are rooted in greed, aversion, delusion, or non-greed, because it has to be rooted in something. Now, I don't know what it is rooted on. Yeah, well, if you make the effort to clarify it, you'll find out that it has to be either greed or non-greed, either resistance or non-resistance, either distraction, delusion, carelessness, or non-distraction, non-delusion. It has to be one of those 6.
Yeah, right.
So if it's the 3 on the side of unwholesome, restrain. That's all you need to do. What do I do next? Nothing. Just restrain for as long as that desire is there. When desire is gone, you might even be able to do the same thing then, if it's not rooted in the same desire. And that's how the Buddha described, like, as for the monks to eat the food. You can't not eat food, because you will die. So if you eat food carelessly, it will automatically be rooted in sensual reasons. If you eat food carefully, it will not. It will be rooted in non-sensual reasons. But if you judge things as good and bad based on their external appearance, that means eating food is always bad. Eating food is always sensuality. And that's sometimes, like, basically people who were not really experienced but kind of got some sense of Buddhism would then think, oh, so everything is a desire, so being a monk is out of a desire, this is a desire, that's craving, that's craving, that's craving, that's craving. Yes, and you saying that everything is craving is your craving as well. And it has to be like that when you start. That's why Buddha meant craving is to be abandoned by the means of craving, conceit by the means of conceit, and desire by the means of desire. So yes, everything is craving. I want to be free from it, I crave for that. But as a result of it, I learn how to restrain things that are rooted in greed, aversion, delusion, and learn how to simply be mindful of things that are rooted in non-greed, non-aversion, non-delusion. So you start to develop a criteria internally for good as good and bad as bad, which is the beginning of Sotapanna. Sotapanna knows kusala is kusala and akusala is akusala. And nobody shorter than Sotapanna knows that. Like Puthujjana might accept that this is kusala and this is a kusala, might adhere for the rest of his life to kusala, but he doesn't know kusala is kusala. He does not understand it. If he were to do so, he would be a Sotapanna. So that's the sense restraint. Again, whether you're a lay person or a monk, precepts, but then within that container of the precepts, you want to start looking at what is the reason behind this action or that action? What is my reason? What are my reasons? What is my motivation? What are my intentions? Are they rooted in desire? Are they rooted in carelessness? And if it's not clear, you make the effort to clarify it. And then you know, oh, so I don't have to say no to everything, because that's impossible to sustain. Like the deer herd that ran on top of a mountain, it's impossible to sustain that. Sooner or later you will have to return. So what if I were to then just say no to things that are clearly rooted in desire, aversion and delusion? And that's pretty much all you need to do. When Zima Vajapati, when she asked the Buddha, oh, can the Lord give me a brief instruction so I can go on a retreat? So whatever you know is wholesome, cultivate. Whatever you know is unwholesome, abandon it. She became an arahant. Literally. Whatever thinking, acting, speaking, is it rooted in unwholesome? Restrain yourself. If it's rooted in non-unwholesome, fine. It will fortify discernment of that criteria. Because the ignorant mind is not ignorant because of everything. It's ignorant because of things that are rooted in greed, aversion, delusion, that you choose to do, that you choose to engage with, that you choose to think.
That's what perpetuates the ignorance.
Ignorance, yeah. Not action in itself.
Yeah.
It's greed, aversion, delusion behind the action that perpetuates greed, aversion, delusion for further actions, which is all ignorance.
So, I think it says in the sutras that in various different ways that, like, the necessary basis or the proximate cause for sense restraint is mindfulness. And sometimes, like, mindfulness of the body in particular.
Well, you wouldn't even make the slightest effort towards sense restraint unless you have acquired some sort of more general value of why that would be good to do. And if you forget why sense restraint is good, that's when you lose it. And that's already a form of mindfulness. Keeping the context, the purpose behind.
But so mindfulness of the body.
Well, mindfulness of the body would be mindfulness of the right context. Mindfulness of the senses.
The senses, yeah.
But, again, you would not be mindful of the senses without the value of sense restraint that you already know.
Right, yeah.
If somebody says, but I don't see the reason why I should be restrained,
yeah.
no amount of mindfulness of the body would result in them wanting restraint.
Yeah.
Quite the opposite. That's when you get all the tantric practices and whatnot.
Yeah.
When people are mindful in the present moment for the purpose of sensuality and everything else. So the correct mindfulness of the body already assumes you have the value of sense restraint.
Yeah.
So if you do have the value of sense restraint, all you need to do is not lose the sight of your situation. Because if you do, that's when motivation gets re-rooted in greed, aversion, delusion. If you are aware of the context of the arisen body and its own nature of that repulsive, not really something worth adhering to, you will not possibly want it and cultivate desire towards it. So mindfulness will bring sense restraint if you have the right view.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the proximate cause for the sense restraint is mindfulness. The proximate cause for mindfulness is the right view.
Yeah. So, yeah, these sort of tantric exercises based on mindfulness.
Yeah, exactly.
That wouldn't be mindfulness.
No,
that's not.
No.
So being mindful of the body involves recognizing
the nature of it.
The nature of this body.
And that begins with Sotapanna.
Yeah.
So until you do, then it's the precepts, and keep trying to develop mindfulness. Keep trying to develop sensory. Keep trying to understand it. Because one thing for sure, yes, sense restraint and precepts will not automatically result in right view, but there will be no right view without the sense restraint and precepts. So you have to have that, and then if you get to understand it, you get the right view.
Yeah, like there's that sutta where the Buddha describes the senses to the wild animals. So each sense
has its own feeding ground.
Yeah, its own preferences, its own things that it likes to eat.
Yeah. The eyes want sights.
Yeah. And it
Mouth wants it. Mind wants images. Needs images. Depends. It's defined by them. Eyes are defined by the sights.
Some are. The eye prefers some sights over others.
Exactly. But desire, lust, aversion, delusion, none of that was rooted in neither eye nor the sights.
No, that's you trying to
that's
gain mastery over it.
Yeah. That's you, implying the notion of that mastery. But it's really like you simply wanting pleasure.
Yeah.
Because the eye experience pleasure on account of, or rather, the eye experience agreeability on account of certain sides, and disagreeability on account of some other sides. None of those is a problem. But for an ignorant mind, agreeability means lust for pleasure. Disagreeability means aversion to get rid of it, aversion towards pain. So you keep then acting towards sight, sound, smell, taste, touches, not because of I wanting the agreeable, that's kind of implied, but because you want pleasure of that agreeable, and you want that, or rather you want to get rid of that which you have aversion towards on account of disagreeable. But if you were to remove that motivation of I want pleasure, I don't want pain, it's literally agreeable, disagreeable. That's how the elements will become bearable. Even like adversity, discomfort will not overwhelm the mind or infect it with aversion and ill will and anger. Because that's a completely separate domain, which obviously with ignorance it's the starting point, so to speak. So yes, if a person can distinguish the difference between agreeable and disagreeable and lust and aversion, you're a step closer to understand lust and aversion. So that's the important point I think here is to not think sense restraint means saying no to everything all the time. Whether you're going to say no to it or not will be determined whether it's rooted in desire, aversion, distraction. That's it. If it's not, then it's fine. Then just be mindful of it, which you will automatically be mindful of. Because see, you're already mindful of motivation behind what you're about to do, and now you know that motivation is not unwholesome, so you're already aware of it. And you will remain aware of it because you'll keep an eye in case it becomes unwholesome. It's important to you to see whether it becomes unwholesome. Yes, I might go to the library to read the suttas, and once I'm in the library and get the suttas, then my mind might change and I might want to stay longer to get to meet other people and socialize and distract myself and whatever else. Oh, you become aware when that purpose changes. Now it's a different thing. Now I'll leave the library because of that. And that's how, again, you will become, eventually you can become your own guide. You will know what is skillful, you will know what's unskillful. No, but going to a library is always good. Everybody says that. All the monks say that, all the people say that, all the Buddhists say that. Well, it isn't. They cannot possibly know where your motivation is rooted. And if they say that that is always good, it means they're not aware of their own motivation, how a factor that determines whether things are good or bad.
It shows how difficult it is to judge.
Yeah. Well, like in the suttas, exactly. Yeah. Oh, he speaks he speaks roughly, harshly. Let's go and complain to the Buddha. He must be a complete lunatic.
What about his motivation?
Yeah. And then the Buddha calls him and says, no, he's an arahant. Yeah, he speaks like that. So what? None of that was rooted in hate or aversion. It was just the way he speaks for whatever reason. It's kind of normal, inevitable to start like that, but we're talking about somebody who doesn't want to practice Dhamma, wants to progress in it, as a layperson or as a monk, doesn't matter. You have to start developing that awareness of motivation behind your action, behind your views even, behind the reasons you think this or don't like that or say this and don't say that. You want to see why. And that's how you will get to undermine all the wrong views as well. Because you start now questioning not just your actions, but even what you think. So like I think, enlightenment and freedom from suffering is such and such. But how do I know that? Why do I think that? Where is that? Where are those thoughts rooted? Where is me investing effort to maintain that view, defend that view, argue that view? Where is that rooted? Why am I doing that? So from your average sense restraint, you came to the point of restraining the outflows of your bad views because you actually started to question them. And then you understand that most of your views are held simply because they were agreeable.
Yeah.
Same principle. They were pleasant, these ideas were pleasant, agreeable, and that's why I wanted that pleasure to persist. And then the opposing view that I heard was disagreeable, that's why it's wrong. That's why we're criticizing. Not because I understood discrepancy, contradiction in it, a fault, went against it. No, it's simply because it displeases me. But all that will become more apparent if you start practicing basic awareness of motivation behind your day-to-day actions. Doesn't matter how small those actions are. And it's not about, I must figure out why. See, like, for example, I want to get up. Why? Because this, because of this, because this. Yeah, but why do I want to get up now? You don't need to wait for the end of your action to find out why you want to do it, because that's not where the motivation is.
Which is why I think, like, it has to include the feeling. It has to be based within how I'm feeling right now, because that's.
Well, it will kind of force you in that direction.
Yeah.
So you want to get up? Why? I need to drink water.
Yeah.
Is that unwholesome? Well, not really. It's a necessity. So I'll get up and I'll drink water. I'll get up because I want to go and talk to such and such. Is that necessary? What's the purpose of it? There's no purpose to it. So then the only purpose, before you actually commit to do it, becomes clear then. It's, I want to go and engage and socialize and distract myself. So the purpose is, it's not lust. I'm not lustful towards that person. It's not anger. I'm not angry. But if there is no other purpose to go and talk to them, why are you doing it? Because you're bored. So that's unwholesome. You got your answer before you went to do it and figure out, and then afterwards, yes, that was unwholesome. You don't want to wait for that. Because otherwise you wouldn't be doing that action in the first place if there is already not a motivation for it present, if there's no reason present. The action would be unintelligible. So that's what I mean, you find it right here, right now, before you actually do it, before you say it, before you think it. And for as long as there is a possibility to go and talk to such and such, for as long as that is there, for the same amount of time, basically, the motivation to do so is there.
Yeah,
it's not like I missed a second, so my motivation escaped me. No. Is there a desire to go and do such and such action still present? Yes, means their motivation has to be there, because motivation unifies them, unifies the purpose.
What's the Buddha says? Chaitanahan bhikkhave kamman ka vadami. Intention bhikkhus is action.
Yeah.
It is action.
Yeah, intention
is the action.
Yeah. So even if you've not gone and distracted yourself by talking, the fact that the intention is there means that desire will be unwholesome. So understanding intention, restraining intention that's rooted in greed, aversion, delusion, that's how you will stop perpetuating ignorance towards it. And that's where the mindfulness comes from as well. Knowing the motivation behind your current act is that fundamental context of your situation. Because you always must be doing something. I'm not doing anything, I'm just sitting here, which is what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, why am I doing this? Is a question you can ask yourself, not for the purpose of finding some ultimate answer, but simply for the purpose of re-establishing the context that you are doing something.
Yeah, like uncovering or clarifying your motivation.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is there whether you see it or not.
Yeah, there has to be. In the same sense I said, there has to be, it either has to be rooted in desire or in greed or non-greed, aversion or non-aversion, distraction or non-distraction. It has to be in some way. So you just want to find out. It's not like I must find something that's not rooted in anything. That's impossible. Yeah. I must simply replace greed with non-greed. If it's rooted in aversion, I better replace it with non-aversion. If it's rooted in distraction, I'll replace it with non-distraction. That's all you can do. But it's this notion of, again, when I say there's no clarity, then the notion of saying no to everything and nothing. As a result of it, you then accept everything and nothing. So then you develop this view of like, it's this, the state you're after in your practice is, it's neither here nor there nor in between the two. But it's really just, no, whenever there's greed, abandon it. Whenever there is non-greed, cultivate it. Maintain it. Protect it so it lasts longer. Don't distract yourself from it. And then again, now is it lust or not? It's lust. don't cultivate it, don't entertain it, don't welcome it, be mindful until it goes away, don't act out of it, restrain yourself. Now it's non-lust, I don't have lust anymore, protect it, cultivate it, entertain it, welcome it, understand it, and so on. And arahantship will have to be the result of that. So in the beginning, everything is affected by desire, say for a layperson. Doesn't mean you need to say no to everything. You simply need to see whether, whatever, you have a desire to go and talk to somebody. Is that against the 5 precepts that I've taken on? Will that talk involve, I don't know, seducing someone else or lying or gossiping? Maybe. Then I won't do it. Will that talk involve that? No, it won't involve. It's still rooted in desire. You cannot not have that. But you want to start rounding it up and making it less and less unwholesome. Then if it's 8 precepts, so say you're celibate, I want to go and talk to the, opposite sex that I might be attracted to. What's the purpose of it? There is no any practical purpose, then you won't do it. Why? Because it can then bring more desire towards something that can compromise your precepts. So that's when they're not set in stone. And when I say they're not set in stone, doesn't mean they're negotiable. It just means they're not set in stone in how far you take them in terms of your restraint and refinement of the principle. Not in terms of blindly saying no to everything and everyone. If it's not rooted in desire, okay, then you can go and do it. If it's not rooted in greed, aversion, delusion, sorry. So once you stop engaging with things that are against the precepts, stop cultivating things that are clearly rooted in greed, aversion, delusion, then your desire towards agreeable and desire towards disagreeable will be seen on the level of the eye, ear, nose, taste and touch. It will not be infected by craving on the level of the mind, which is how it used to be. Before, any agreeable was lustful. Any disagreeable was basically resisted towards. Any neutral was distracted from. So, with desire, you practiced, and now you resulted in seeing through the desire. That's it, huh?
I think so.
Anything comes to your mind?
But just that each person that practices the way you just said, knowing the motivation and keeping to the wholesome, avoiding the unwholesome, it's not going to physically look the same. Everyone's not going to
do the same things.
Physically look the same.
Yeah. No, of course not. Yeah.
Everyone who does that lives in the forest.
No.
Everyone who does that wears rag robes.
No. That's the whole point.
And doing those things won't.
Because as I said, exactly. I want to go and wear rag robes and live in the forest. What's my motivation? It's actually I want to be better than everybody else. So that's not wholesome, isn't it? That's extremely. So is that the reason? And if that's the sole reason you want to do it, then you don't do it. Maybe I'm a bit conceited about it. But I also found out that when I'm in the forest, exposed to elements, endurance, fatigue, insects and so on, my mind gets very sharp. Okay, so that becomes your reason now to do it. But if you never stop and think about the reasons behind your actions, none of this will ever become intelligible. But yes, some people will always, going to a forest will always be unwholesome. They cannot not do it for unwholesome reasons.
Would you say, and like romantic reasons?
Exactly, romantic reasons are unwholesome reasons, So that's what I mean, it's determined, and when they asked the Buddha, when David had asked the Buddha to make all these ascetic practices mandatory, because they're so inspirational, they're good. The Buddha said, no, let those who want to live in the forest, those who don't want to not to. In other words, let those who know that living in the forest is beneficial for them live there, and those who know that it's not beneficial don't live there. Which means you need to know what's beneficial, and you will know that if you become aware of motivation behind your day-to-day actions, literally.
We said it before that those Dhutanga practices that has been clumped together, the 13 Dhutangas. I don't know if that's in the commentaries or sutras, but you've clumped that together. This is the Dhutanga practice which results in the right practice.
Yeah, exactly. No.
But it's actually the right practice.
Determine the Dhutangas.
Yeah. They come.
Yeah, monks were rag wearing whatever, living in the forest because that's what was making their right view grow. Yeah. But now you just need to adhere to, I'll never lay down, and somehow that will result in magical enlightenment.
Yeah,
so,
making a random determination.
Random, absolutely random.
Yeah. I will not lie down for the next 3 months.
No. Yeah. So everything you do is with the desire. You want to start doing things that are not unwholesome out of that desire. They don't. Will this thing that is rooted in desire perpetuate greed, perpetuate aversion, perpetuate delusion? No, it won't. Then you can do that desire. Because I have a desire to be sense restrained because I value Dhamma, and I hopefully will ever achieve complete freedom from suffering. That's a valid desire. Will that desire bring more desire, more greed, aversion, delusion? No. Then do it. Oh, but I have a desire to go and, pig out and socialize and everything. Will that bring more greed, aversion, delusion? Yes. Then you don't do it. But people, because they recognize everything is rooted in desire, try to deny all desire. No, there is a desire that will bring more desire, and there is a desire that will sort of take you away from greed, aversion, delusion. And you will know that when you start discerning the motivation behind your actions.
That's the thing, when you begin the practice, you find a teacher maybe. You think, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. And then you try to emulate him on a physical level. But that's not for you, that might be the wrong thing to be doing. So you might be, the monk might know what he's talking about, but living in a very luxurious place. And so, the Ajahn, my teacher, he lives in a luxurious place, so therefore so can I.
Place,
Therefore it's right for me also. But actually, you might have to live more ascetically. Or the vice versa. An ascetic monk, you might have to not go so far and live as ascetic.
What you should be learning from your Ajahn is not how he lives and try to emulate that, it's the right view. You should be developing the right criteria, and then you will know what's right for you in that sense, because you learned rightly from that person. But that person then needs to know what they're talking about. So that was like in the suttas when the Buddha said, when the man said, oh, all these monks respect the Buddha so much, and he says, why do you think that they respect me? He said, because Master Gautama praises eating, he eats little and praises eating little. He lives in the forest and praises living in the forest and wears rag robes and praises wearing. And he said, no, that's not the case. I have disciples that live on like one handful of rice every third day, and I sometimes get bowl to the brim full of food, and sometimes 2 bowls to the brim I eat. So if they were to respect me on account of eating little, they wouldn't, because I don't always eat little. Sometimes I stay in king's palaces. If they were to respect me on account of sleeping rough, they wouldn't, because I don't do that all the time. But why do they respect me? Because I showed them the Four Noble Truths. I showed them the right view. I showed them Patisampada. I showed them freedom from suffering. And all these ways of practicing. It's like, oh yeah, directly visible here and now. And then they realize lifestyle, things you do, how it fits with that understanding or not. But if people can only judge the book by the cover, that's it. That's their only criteria. So when they see the Buddha eating a lot, they would dismiss him. As his former friends did. Although he was already fully enlightened. But now that's not to say, oh, so I can then eat carelessly as much as I want. Well, are you a Sotapanna? Are you Anagami? If you're not, then you better be careful.
That's the thing, for a lot of people will start trying to emulate the person, the teacher, physically, to look like the teacher. In a way, there is a responsibility in the teacher as well.
Yes.
Because that's where people are going to come from.
Yeah. Well, that's why it said, like in the suttas, when somebody like Mahakassapa was refused to leave the forest after the Buddha invited him himself, said, come and live with me, I get the shelters and lodgings and nice robes, you've done your work. said, no, I find all this agreeable, this is not unpleasant for me, because, he has all the jhanas. And then the Buddha said, well done, you're practicing for the sake of future generations. That's what it means. It is inspiring, factually inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
It can be rooted in right or wrong reasons, but it's factually inspiring for people when they hear about it. So that's where that responsibility comes in. But it's not really that kind of, you're responsible for what you do. You're responsible for what view you put out there. If you're putting out the view that simply by emulating certain type of behavior, you will arrive at the right view, that's what you're responsible for. That's what the Buddha said, there is no such thing, not a single thing in the world, as blameworthy as wrong view, and presenting non-Dhamma as Dhamma. Inadvertently, doesn't matter. As a result of your views, of what you say practice is, people now do that thinking they're practicing while in reality they're not. That's what everybody's responsible for. If sometimes, you do certain things and people see that and they take that to mean that, well, that's not directly onto you. But if you say and encourage the view that emulating behavior will result in freedom from suffering, that's on you.
Perhaps because that's what you're doing as a teacher.
You wouldn't be encouraging it. You wouldn't be encouraging it unless you have that view.
Exactly, yeah.
Or like the other one was, what was the other one we spoke about before? So sense restraint is hard. It's difficult to be sense restrained, especially when you live in the lay world. Yeah, that's factually correct. But it's also factually correct that there is no Dhamma without the sense restraint. So, in other words, you can then say, so practicing Dhamma in the lay world is very hard. And that's an accurate statement. But if you say, sense restraint is hard, and there's no Dhamma without sense restraint, but sense restraint is hard, that's why maybe you don't need to do it, and do something else. But still presented on the pretext of practicing the Dhamma. And that's how directly you obscure the Dhamma. Yes, sense restraint is hard and virtually impossible to develop for most people, which means Dhamma is then virtually impossible to develop. But there are those who could develop it. But they won't develop it if you tell them, no, you don't have to be sense restrained. Just because of the vast majority, for which it makes no difference what you tell them, they will not be sense restrained. But because of that, to pander to them, you dilute the necessary principle for practicing of the Dhamma, which is the sense restraint. So it would have been like what we said before, like when the Buddha decided, first he didn't want to teach, because most world would not understand the Dhamma. Then he agreed to teach, but this would be if he were to say, so I want to teach the Dhamma, but most of the world can't understand the Dhamma because they can't be restrained. So instead of teaching the principle of restraint in the Dhamma, which is the only thing I can teach, let me teach them something else.
Yeah.
Because they can't understand this, so let me just make them happy.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. If you were to say that, listen, I'm not going to teach you Dhamma. You can't understand it. I'll just make you feel good. That's fine. You're honest.
Yeah.
But if you say, well, listen, Dhamma is hard, but I'm still under the pretext of teaching you the Dhamma, but I'll just instead make you happy. And now you're happy and you think you're practicing the Dhamma that Ajahn told you. And you're not. So it's virtually impossible for most people. But for those for whom it isn't, that's what these principles are for. Again, it's similar in the suttas that there's a horse that just at the sound of a whip is ready to do the work. There's another horse who needs to see the whip, then gets ready to do the work. There's the one that needs to feel the whip. And then there is the fourth type, which is vast majority of people that you just flog and makes no difference. So then that simply means if sense restraint is hard, means practice of the Dhamma is hard. Not like sense restraint is hard, so let me change those terms so I can still practice the Dhamma. That's impossible.